Mm-mm.
So, guest, hi.
Hi. Okay, is my
Blinksi.
microphone good or?
Yeah, it's good. So
Okay.
Absolutely.
Blinski. That's what you want to be called, Blinski.
Yeah, let's go with Blinski. That's sort of my political channel. I've got two channels. The Von Video is mostly just music that I make.
Okay, cool.
In that case, Здравствуйте, Blinski.
Oh, хорошо. Молодец.
So, Derek, I can't beat around the bush with this because this is how Derek introduced you and how I put in the preview is that you're somebody that went through a detransitioning.
That is right.
And well, good job, by the way. I would have never known by looking at you. So,
Yeah.
you successfully come back from whatever that was, and I think that it would be completely intellectually dishonest to just act like we're not going to talk about that at all. And since you're a little bit late, I think that maybe we should get right into that. Talk about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, I'm
Talk
pretty
about
no nonsense. I think nothing is offensive to me, so we can go in deep if you want.
yeah, and
I
then
don't
and
really
then
care.
I'd love to talk with you about other such things. But the detransitioning, I got to give a little bit of a preface. I don't know how much of my channel you've watched, but it's something that I've talked about a lot. And I made a whole video called Detransitioning the New Transgender YouTube Craze. And I've also made numerous videos about trans trenders. And the reason why I felt compelled to do such a thing is because of the fact that I've known trans people since 2007 is when I met my first friend who um, at some point started identifying as trans, identified as a lesbian at that point. But I mean, in retrospect, it was like not surprising that this person was, ended up defining as trans. And in that person's case, they actually did not want to take hormones for many years, even though they suffered from extreme gender dysphoria, but they were afraid of the side effects of the medications and getting cancer. And so they wouldn't go on them. And then finally, they decided that their gender dysphoria was crippling them and they went on it. And so that really kind of opened up my eyes towards just how hard it is for some people with gender dysphoria, that like it's not that they're doing it because they want to, is that this was like a treatment that seemed most viable for them as an individual. But then I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in 2007, and I was around a bunch of, blue haired freaks with a beard that called themselves a woman and wore a mini skirt and, like that kind of a crap. And they wanted they pronouns, and and it was like, whoa, this is a fad for some people. And so I know that there is that type of person out there, but at the same token, in terms of you, I have no reason to believe that you're absolutely any of these things. I don't even know, but I think that I would like to hear.
Yeah, well, I think I'm not most aptly described as a transgender, but I'm also not most aptly described as a genuine transgender woman. I think if you guys have ever heard the term autogynephilia,
Okay.
you know
Yeah.
that one?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
people say ContraPoints is.
Yeah, well, I think she is. If typically when you find intellectual trans women there's basically two versions of trans women that I found, and they're both different, unique, and in their own way. I don't want to insult anyone, but there's
You can insult ContraPoints though. Please do.
Contraflits. I actually was subscribed to her channel for a bit, but I unsubscribed because it was like long form content, but the actual substantive points only warranted maybe like a 5-minute video.
Yeah, and
But
then they're also intellectually dishonest. So
yeah. Well, I don't know.
anyhow,
ContraPoints
no,
is going
let's
through
get sorry. Moving on, because
there's the type of trans woman who is who sort of comes up in life acting like a gay boy, or even just straight up acting like a girl, and they're like that their whole life, and then when they transition, no one's really surprised. Um, this is like Blair White, for instance, is a great example of this, and then they typically pass very well. And then on the other side, you have the autogynephilic type, which oftentimes are present very masculine their entire life, and then they'll just sort of all of a sudden come out and transition. They typically don't pass as well. I passed okay, but not super great. I was never able to get my voice right, and they're a version of trans women that's been around for a while, and there are plenty of autogynephiles that continue to live that life. They don't eventually detransition. Caitlyn Jenner is clearly an autogynephile, in my opinion. Once you know the differences between the two, it's really easy to pick out. Autogynephiles are typically seem more autistic. Whenever you see like an autistic person who identifies as trans or someone that seems really kind of spurgy, like I'm an example of someone who's pretty spurgy, and they start identifying as trans, there's a good chance they're the autogynephilic version.
Okay.
In the autogynephilic version, they've done studies on this, tend to actually inhabit positions tend to be in respected professions that require a lot of higher education. So there's a lot of doctors, lawyers.
Oh, like Mappa from Transparent.
Yep. Well, yeah, Mappa is a classic example of the autogynephile. Autogynephilic trans women tend to come out of the closet later in life too.
Yeah.
The Blair White version, they're going to be sort of insistent that they want to be a girl almost their entire life, and usually by the time they're 16, they're just presenting female entirely.
Yeah, and I've known those type of people. Like, growing up, I grew up right in the city of Seattle. Like I could my high school about 15-minute walk to the gay neighborhood, and so we would go there frequently. And so I used to know like homeless, runaway, or like kicked out of their parents' house. People who hadn't transitioned, but eventually would go on to, and you could tell that they very, very likely would. Like a lot of the time, they were teenage boys that had female hips, and those were more of the probably the Blair White type. So.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't really know where to go from there. Is there any specific questions, or any topic areas you'd like me to?
Well, I imagine some people do, but it's very so. Yeah, how about I direct this a little bit more? So, when was there a specific catalyst that you decided it was the option to at least identifying as an actual woman? Did you go on hormones? Was that because you saw a therapist or something, or was this just a decision personal?
Well, I was at a very vulnerable point in my life. I had lost a lot of friends because I had left undergraduate school and sort of lost contact with people. I think I was very lonely. And also I was falling down the dark pit that is alcoholism. I was a rampant alcoholic, and I would drink during the day and everything. And so my mind just was foggy. And I also, unfortunately, have obsessive compulsive disorder. And I don't know if you guys have heard of HOCD. Do you know what that is?
No.
That's called homosexual or obsessive compulsive disorder. That's where this is a thing that actually exists. It's where people with OCD they get fixated on the idea that they might be gay, even though they in fact are not. And I think there's a little bit of that going on with me. And so I became just absolutely fixated on the idea that I might be transgender. I think one of the major catalysts was just all of the media attention that was in the fact that it was sort of out in the open. And so I walk this line between, I want to take responsibility for my actions. I don't want to paint myself as a victim and be like, oh, I was tricked by the mainstream media. It's the mainstream media's fault for pushing it so hard. They made me make this bad decision when I was vulnerable. Because I want to take responsibility for my own actions. But at the same time, I have to recognize that there were a certain number of factors. If the topic of transgenderism had not even like broached the public space, it's likely that I never would have done that. But I think it was a combination of my alcoholism, my loneliness, my OCD, and media coverage of transgenderism that I just eventually, over a course of years, convinced myself that I was transgender and that I wanted to live as a woman. And then I went ahead and I actually did do that. I went on hormones, and I lived full-time as a woman for over 3 years.
How did you get your hormones? Was there a medical
Yeah.
professional?
Well, I went to Park Nicollet. I went to a doctor called Dr. Farias. She's one of the these are called informed consent clinics, and they're at first I thought it was a really great thing, and now I don't really know. Because the idea is traditionally, if you were a transgender person, you would have to go to a doctor, and the doctor would run, for instance, like a trial period on you. They'd say, okay, you need to live as a woman for a year, and if you still want to transition, then we'll give you hormones.
Yeah.
Informed consent clinic, they'll basically give you a diagnosis on demand. So you can go in and they'll be like, so tell me about your experience. They'll say, well, I've always wanted to be a woman. And and then they'll say, and then she's literally said, like, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much do you want to live as a woman? I said 10. And then she just gave me the diagnosis of gender identity disorder. I think it was gender identity disorder, not gender dysphoria at the time, and gave me the pills on the first day. And then I was
Huh.
off.
Yeah, that's I would say I'm against that personally. But
From a medical standpoint, that just sounds extremely irresponsible. I mean, that's not taking the patient's well-being into account at all.
But oh my
Well,
god, doing
in
anything else would be utterly transphobic. Like, oh my god. Come on,
well,
it
it's
takes me a second to switch into Valley Girl voice.
I tried my darndest to learn how to talk like a girl, so I could just talk like this from now on. Hey guys, Jocelyn here. How you doing?
That's impressive.
Anyway, yeah, I worked on it for a while.
It shows.
I can sound like Blair White if I try, but I mean literally like Blair White. I don't mean
Do
like.
it.
Well, yeah, I understand that this is not like a popular opinion. This is not a PC opinion, but I've never been one to be PC. I'm a tranny, and I honestly, as soon as I transitioned, it's like I had a lot of female privileges. Like, ladies first, that is a thing. I'm sorry.
that's pretty close.
That is great. I love Blair White, and that is awesome.
Yeah, no, Blair White
No,
is really
I
badass.
I liked Blair White a lot when she had the female privilege video. It was a revelation, and I showed it to many people and watched it many times. So that's why I can do that. I have this tendency to start mimicking the things I've watched over and over again. You know, like the Sargon video where he talks about Stephanie Guthrie, the man that got the guy brought up on criminal charges in Canada for tweets. He's like, meet Steph Guthrie, whereof problem glasses, professional feminist, and self-righteous Twitter activist. No, I know we're only seconds into this video, and you're already thinking to yourself, holy shit, she looks like a total cunt. And you'd be right. She absolutely is a total cunt. But I'm not as good at the Sargon voice.
I think you could use some work on the British accent, but I appreciate
oh yeah, I'm terrible with accents. Anyhow, but I've certainly tried. It's the point. So yes, that's a detour into voices. But when did you start to realize that you did not want to be transgender?
Well, I think it was just once I left school, I went out into the workforce, and everything just sort of slowed down because you just every day is essentially the same. It's just you do your 9 to 5, go home, stuff. And then I just noticed that there are certain inconveniences that come with being a trans woman, especially if you're a trans woman who doesn't exactly pass. You know, you have people looking at you. You have people kind of, when you interact with people, they're a little bit different. And I just and bathrooms are just not comfortable for me. I would always just use a unisex restroom just because I didn't want to have to deal with that problem. And so eventually I was like, okay, so there's a lot of cons. Now, what are the pros? And it was like, well, I mean, I'm not actually that much happier than I was when I was living as a man. I think at first I was, because it was this new exciting thing. I got to build a whole wardrobe full of women's clothes. I got to learn makeup. I started experiencing the world in a different way. And in that way, it was kind of enriching. But after a while, everything just sort of leveled out, and it was just me living my life. And I wasn't any happier than I had been before. So I was like, basically, I'm just creating inconveniences for myself by doing this.
Huh.
And I never and I never quite felt at home with the girls or with the boys. That's the problem, because I was always, my personality wasn't that different when I was living as a woman as I'm right now. I probably sounded the same too. I didn't actually use that Valley Girl voice very often. So it was like, what's it? It's just like, you're gonna wear a dress or you're gonna wear a shirt, and it doesn't fucking matter, except wearing a dress comes with all these problems. And I just decided that the cons outweighed the pros, of which there were very few. Not to mention the estrogen and stuff caused me to gain a great deal of weight. I gained like 100 pounds over the course of like 3 years.
Wow.
And since I went off the hormones, I've been losing slowly, but I have been losing. So
That's a side effect I didn't even consider.
Yeah,
testosterone has a big effect on your metabolism.
Yeah, it's way easy to build muscle, and that muscle burns fat and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, what you said, I want to come back to one thing that you said, kind of, which makes a lot of sense, and I want you to maybe expand upon this a little bit, is this notion of not being able to feel like you fit in with the guys or the girls. I've often wondered if there's the best word for you isn't transgender, but people who decide to, not because they have crippling gender dysphoria, but for whatever reason decide to transition, if they're largely doing it because they want to fit in with the girls. And you found that didn't end up actually working, regardless of whether was your motivation. How did you feel? Like, do you feel like that was maybe more your personality, or do you feel as if it turns out that women are actually still judgmental of trans women because they don't see them as real women?
I'll say this, which is that the way I started being treated by women is dramatically different. Dramatically different. The biggest thing that I learned from transitioning is that women experience the world in a very different way. Mm-hmm. It was kind of astonishing. It took some getting used to. And some of it is, I think, that I was a trans woman, so it's not like I was experiencing the world as necessarily a bona fide woman. But there were a number of people who would treat me as if I were a woman, or a lot of times people would think I was a real woman until I maybe opened my mouth and the deep voice came out. And people are nicer to you. I think when you're straight men have this thing, and I'm sure gay men have it too, especially when people don't know if you're gay, where women are always they keep a little bit of distance, and that's everywhere. That's the cashier at the grocery store, that's at work. They are a little bit guarded, and when you're a woman, that whole I think they're doing that right because they don't want to give you the wrong impression, which is totally understandable. But when you're a girl, of course, or you're a gay man, it doesn't present that problem, and so then women completely change. And now all of a sudden they're a lot warmer. It's really bizarre. So I actually did, when I could say there weren't many pros, I think that was one pro, is that women are just a lot warmer, a lot more willing to be your friend, a lot less guarded.
I had a very funny experience when I was in San Francisco. One of the only nights that I ever did drag, and I've actually shown a picture from this. I don't want to dig it up, but I actually looked pretty good. Not like amazing, but I was thin. I looked believably female in terms of my outfit, and I was wearing like white kind of spandex leggings, shiny, and a sweater dress with a white belt, and a kind of a Cher wig, with bangs that were straight across the forehead. And I didn't have tacky drag makeup on. I just had lipstick and eyebrows, and so I looked like an actual woman who would go out to a club.
You're fishy, as they say, fishy.
Yeah, and I made the mistake of walking through the Tenderloin neighborhood, which is about like the seediest, like scariest, most crackheady neighborhood on the West Coast, outside of like Skid Row, Los Angeles. And so I walked through it by myself at probably like 11 p.m. and so it's all dark and everything. And I got hollered at like 4 or 5 times, and I you know, by and not like by dudes that were maybe that would be cool, but like by crackheads and shit. And so it was actually kind of terrifying. And one of them I said hi back to, and he was like, "Oh shit, your voice is deeper than mine." And you know, and so it was like, there are definitely disadvantages to being female in certain situations. Because
of course, I'm not going to doubt that. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's why women are guarded around men, because there's always a real risk.
Yeah.
There's a line to be drawn between, I mean, there's a middle ground between women don't have any disadvantages and all men are potential rapists. You know, it's like women can be justifiably guarded, but that doesn't also mean that all men are monsters. You know, there's a middle ground there.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a very important middle ground. I mean, it's true. I mean, there is always going to be some kind of risk out there. It comes with being human, especially comes with being a human that is physically tends to have a lot less upper body strength.
Well, and also, and they're attracted to, you know, like there's, it's not just the like I'm gonna mug you. It's the like I have an innate visceral reason to want to follow you around, and you can't really necessarily defend yourself, so how do you get rid of me? Like
I mean, almost all women are easily physically overpowered by men, and so the only thing they have to work with is their language. And some people say that that's actually why women are quote unquote manipulative, is because they had to learn to be facile with their language in order to be persuasive, because they couldn't have recourse in their physicality. So
of course, I believe that has to be the case. I mean, it doesn't make sense biologically otherwise, you know. So
although when you look at chimpanzees, it's also biologically true that men are more likely to be solitary and compete amongst themselves, where women are more likely to group up and gang up. And so when you look at chimpanzees, it's actually the female chimpanzees who are the ones who are deciding which men have power within the troop, because there's more females than men. And actually, the women, when they don't approve of the alpha male within the group, will throw rocks and other things at that alpha in order to create space for another alpha to take the spot.
Really interesting.
I think my ex-wife did the same thing.
Well, I think there's no question that women engage in a vetting process. I mean, women are very selective with which men they are going to deem to be worthy of being with them. Men obviously are not particularly selective. And that's obviously evolutionary, right? Because a man, evolutionarily speaking, the best man would be the man who can plant his seed in as many women as possible. Whereas with a woman, you need to find someone who's going to stick around and help you raise this kid. And so you're going to be looking for things like wealth and loyalty. Whereas with men, it's like, well, I just need to spread my seed as far as possible.
So Jordan, I'm very curious. Jordan being our non-licensed but degree-holding person that has credentials of a sort in this kind. Okay, and I'll ask you because you actually brought this up the last time you were here, or maybe it was on the stream on my live stream channel. You talked about how they talk so much about male privilege and female privilege, and or like it used to be the case that because apparently you studied in class transgender, what happens when people transition and how it comes with a new set of disadvantages and advantages based on being either gender. And then the radical gender abolitionists and radical gender deconstructionists or whatever, like the intersectionals, people who want to just get rid of gender entirely or whatever, they were trying to basically get rid of that part of the curriculum and act like it sort of doesn't matter. But I don't remember exactly how you phrased it. What would you have to say about this stuff?
Well, I know someone personally who started off a year ago, or maybe about less than 2 years ago, as a not going from male identified to non-gendered, and using only plural pronouns, even to the point of referring to themselves as we.
Like royalty.
That was, and he had a, or they, or God, they had a female identified but bisexual girlfriend, who was actively bisexual, because she had a girlfriend, and they did not have any other partner. And then now that person has transitioned to a female identified person, and is on the hormone therapy, and has a partner now who is gender queer, female to male, but some not quite, like, but started as a female, is now gender queer. And so, all of that very complicated and political, and comes with a lot of storytelling and comic books and video blogs. And I've watched this process happen through social media. And, recently there was a comic book that came out from this person's genderqueer, not girlfriend, made a comic book about how they were upset about the pharmaceutical industrial complex requiring them to buy these drugs so that they can feel better identified with blah, 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 and how that pissed them off, because at the same time, they're like a radical activist, anti-pharmaceutical person. And at the same time, their girlfriend, who just transitioned into being a female, is talking about how excited she is that her bangs are getting longer because of the hormonal therapy she's taking. And it was a really just striking moment to me, where I'm like, okay, so regardless of all of this transitioning, the person that I personally know that went from being a male to a non-gendered to a female is still mating with female-bodied persons, regardless of the fact that this female-bodied person is now like hormonally transitioning or something genderqueer. And it was just like, kind of thought to myself, like, well, this is just such a, like, is it like, why, like, what is the necessity of going through this extra layer of chemical transitioning when you're still pretty much attracted to the same kind of person, and this person lives in San Francisco, which is a very accepting city. I mean, you can pretty much present as whatever you want here,
I've known a couple that was they were both transgender, one male to female, one female to male, and then they were partners.
Yeah. It just, I don't know, to me it just seems like, a lot of money, a lot of time, and I don't see the benefit necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to preface any comments I may have with the fact that I'm a pretty stout libertarian, and that means pretty socially liberal on these things, which means I have no intention of ever dictating how someone's going to live, and unless they're going to be hurting someone else. And so that's why I'm not hostile to people who are going to identify as genderqueer. I might be skeptical, but I'm not going to go up to them and insult them or anything like that. If it makes them happy to identify as genderqueer, or to take hormones, then I Godspeed, good luck and Godspeed. It made me happy for a while. the thing where I get concerned is where you could be influencing people in vulnerable situations. Like, unfortunately, I think I might have been one of those people. I think I was in a vulnerable situation. I might have been influenced by the extensive media coverage into making a decision that I ultimately regretted.
Yeah.
And then you also, when you start dragging children into it, that's when I start getting really worried. Um, you have children, if a kid wants to wear a dress, that's fine. But if a kid wants to start on hormones and you start putting them on like puberty blockers at like age 12, it just seems a little, I don't know, I'm not super comfortable with it. Because children are vulnerable and they rely on the judgments of others. They can't make their own decisions.
Well, not to mention, we have no idea what the long-term effects of these treatments are on a person, especially when so young.
Not to mention the gender fluid people, they're not happy about anything anyways. Like no matter what you give them, they're just never going to be happy. You know,
They're just
Yeah.
resentful.
well, my
Well,
recommendation is an orgasm and alcoholism, but that's just me.